Okay, time to go. So, welcome everybody. So, Big Brother is actually a book by Lionel Shriver, and it's about a sister trying to rescue a man who is actually eating himself to death. It's a real story because the brother of the author, Lionel Shriver, died of obesity-related conditions at the age of 55. This is a topical issue because, as the WHO indicates, the proportion of obesity-related conditions is assuming epidemic proportions with almost 4 million deaths in 2017. So it's a health issue. But Big Brother Out to Lunch also wants to refer to the possibilities offered by new data-intensive technologies that allow monitoring, quantifying, controlling, giving advice about nutrition, separating malnutrition from good nutrition, and of course they encroach upon the private sphere. Out to Lunch is because today we're going to talk about food, eating, how it has changed, how technologies affect nutrition, and in turn how knowledge about nutrition affect or influence technology development. So Out to Lunch. It's also a quote from a song by the Sex Pistols. So that's how it came about. And now I go straight to our panel. In order of appearance, we have Tanja Schneider. Tanja Schneider has many qualifications. So she's based in Switzerland, but she also flies to Oxford. And she's going to talk about digital food activism, a book she published, she edited in 2018, about nutritionism, and yes, about the digital food culture. So she's going to bring an STS perspective. And then we have Maria. Great to see you. Maria, can you hear us?
Okay, yes, Maria, hello.
Good.
Hello, everyone.
And Maria, she's going to instead give us the health professional perspective. She's actually a professor at the Department of Nutritional Science and Dietetics of the International Hellenic University, based, and she's joining us from Thessaloniki, beautiful Thessaloniki. And then we're going to abandon a little bit the perspective, the STS and the medical nutrition perspective, to have a look at the legal political landscape, in particular from the point of view of the consumer. And here we have Wolfgang Schmidt from BOIC, the consumer umbrella organization of the European Union, which this year celebrates 60 years. And then, last but not least, our Olga, LSTS researcher, who will elaborate on some legal implications. Please, Tanja, the floor is yours. The slides.
So just that?
The green
goes ahead. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, super. So thanks very much to the panel organizers for inviting me, and thanks for your interest in coming. So at the risk of oversimplification, there are two common approaches to studying food and eating practices. That's what the sociologist Deborah Lupton tells us. So there's a sociocultural and a sociobiological nutritional perspective. But what does she mean by that? She describes the nutritional perspective as having an instrumental view focused on anatomical functioning of the body and state of health. This approach builds on the key assumption that the human diet is guided by genetic predispositions and culturally structured preferences. She explains, and I'll quote her, "For the majority of nutritionists, the sociocultural factors around food are of interest only in terms of the barriers or enhancements they pose to allow people to adopt the correct diet. Culture is most often viewed as an impediment to the goals of nutrition." Anthropologists, sociologists, and other researchers in this field are more interested in the symbolic dimension of food and eating practices. They consider food and eating more focused on individual subjectivities And those working in the tradition, they're mostly interested in how human food preferences come about and how do they diffuse throughout society, how do they change. But they're also interested to account for major differences between human cultures and their food practices and preferences. So they're also very interested in the structural features of society, obviously, such as gender and socioeconomic privilege and power relations that play in a central role in this. So I would say, if you reflect for a moment which of these approaches dominate your own understanding of healthy eating, I would venture to say that many of you think of it in terms of calories, nutrients, or nutrient groups such as protein, fat, and carbohydrates. I'm sure not all of you, not always. Georgi Skrines, whose book I have here on the screen, he's an associate professor of food politics and policy at the University of Melbourne. He calls this the ideology of nutritionism. By this he means a very functional and reductive approach to body and health that promotes the so-called nutritional gaze and nutri-centric people. In that such an understanding of food and nutrition, the quality and type of food is less important, and such an approach undermines other ways of engaging with foods, traditional, cultural, sensual, but also ecological approaches, he argues. He compares this development historically to sort of show also how this terminology has been coming about and how it's been taken up, and it's become very prominent in the supermarkets in the later part of the 20th century. If you look at products, they always have this information available. It's also a way, of course, nutrition policy is translated on consumer products. Food geographers, Hayes Conroy and Hayes Conroy, have described this as nutrition's iceberg, where hegemonic nutrition is produced and proliferated by a broad range of social institutions, including media, but also big food, as some would call it. And they and others contributing to their volume, doing nutrition differently, call for more attentive new nutrition that takes into account not only the tip of the iceberg, but to include topics such as conviviality, food access, sustainability, and many more. So this is so much for a look to the back. So now we're kind of approaching digital times. So fast forward, we have now firmly arrived in a more digitally infrastructured and networked society. In relation to food and eating, this is captured in the term digital food cultures. People engage in a wide variety of practices and activism across different digital media, including YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, but also apps and devices. And these practices have more recently been documented in this range of different books that is also contributing to a growing new subfield of food studies, but that's quite interdisciplinary, I should point out, called digital food studies. For instance, a contribution to this body of work by Rachel Kent, who's a lecturer in digital economy and society at King's College in London, found that self-tracking technologies and social media platforms enable multiple ways to monitor and represent the human body, and a quote from her, that wellness has become not a choice, but a moral obligation for health management under digital capitalism and neoliberalism. So based on her 9-month ethnography of 14 participants, including men and women between 26 and 49 years old, who were regular health and fitness-related platform users based in the UK, continental Europe, and New Zealand, she found the following 3 points that I'd like to highlight quickly. So, for instance, she highlights, as you see here, that health expertise works in alliance with an individual ethics. So, very strong focus on the individual taking care of him or herself with nutritional apps that she has been studying, which then presents often also a risk of oversimplification and overgeneralization of health and the body, sometimes leading to issues related of overexercise, misinformation, or poor mental health. There's also a pervasive moralism of health in everyday lives in relation to the participants that she studied. So lifestyle choices were very strongly tied to ethical parameters of good and bad behaviors. And if one didn't maintain one's healthy behaviors, the judgment was on oneself to be lacking of self-discipline. And this self-discipline is very important in the sense of legitimating ways of good behavior. And if you don't perform good behavior, you may allow yourself, she found, to have certain cheat days where you kind of opt out of your regime or your app. But the burden of self-regulation with these kind of wellness apps, specifically for talking about dietary tracking here, rests firmly with the individual. So being one of the early researchers studying digital food practice, I started to wonder, could it be otherwise? So when about 3 years ago, colleagues at ETH Zurich approached me about becoming involved in an interdisciplinary research project aiming to develop a dietary monitoring and intervention app, I decided that this could be an opportunity to do so. The goal of this research project is to develop an automated approach for the analysis of digital shopping data based on consumer loyalty cards by 2 major Swiss retailers that those who want to participate donate to us under the Swiss data protection regulation. And this information is then made available in an app to users via a mobile phone. Together we devised this interdisciplinary project, a food coach, which by now has received funding by the Swiss National Science Foundation, which I gratefully acknowledge. And in addition to the technical stream and the digital health stream, we also developed a societal stream that focuses on users' meanings and non-users' meanings and practices of food and diet-related monitoring apps and digital health. To study these meanings and practices on, one team member, Arlene Sternberger, has recently conducted a survey on what eating well means to Swiss participants in this survey, and to what extent and how often digital media and technologies play a role in relation to food and eating for those that we surveyed, which were roughly 450 at this point in time. We also had another food coach team member, Giada Denisi, who conducted ethnographic go-alongs of users of a prototype of the app. And we are also currently in the process of conducting interviews with consumers about their use more broadly beyond the food coach app of dietary tracking apps. So the question that is firmly on our mind in this societal stream of this research project is to think about how to do dietary tracking differently, how to not inscribe nutritionism as a reductive ideology while recognizing the value of nutrition science, for sure. As such, the task at hand is not only to study what's going on, but to envision and hopefully co-produce in this interdisciplinary team dietary tracking otherwise. And maybe sort of as an outlook, the project continues on for another 2 years. Our ambition really is to tinker with the affordances of the app in the app development process based also on the voices we bring in from our qualitative and quantitative studies of users, non-users, and consumers more broadly. And to foster an awareness about the life of data and to provoke different forms of engagement with data, but also with food and eating, including data activism, which some of my team members and I have been writing about. So to conclude, I would really like to thank the team that's been involved in the Food Coach project and our participants, and also you for coming and for the opportunity to talk with you all today.
There is any urgent question from the audience? Please don't hesitate. Because otherwise, I have on the top of my mind. Is there anybody? Okay, yeah. You mentioned on the one hand health expertise, on the other hand individual ethics. Then I saw an iceberg with a swirling diversity of variables there, and then I see that you involve research participants. I mean, how can the involvement of research participants really reflect that diversity? What approach do you use in order to recruit? Because this is crucial.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. I think it's really important, and we are sort of, this is the project where we start to do this in kind of classical sociological ways, I would say, by talking to those who are affected, asking them to be participants in this project, but I'm sure there could be many more inventive methods to do it. So this is something in that direction I would want to go further in this project, but also in other projects which are very important to me. But here we're just starting out to see that perhaps it's not sufficient to ask for practices and observe them and then to speak on behalf of them that we studied, but to get them actually more on board in forms of more citizen science related formats of projects and digital participation.
It's a hell of a job.
Yeah, there's more work to do.
Thank you very much. So Maria, can you hear us? I mean, were you shivering when you heard about the ideology of nutritionism? But please, the floor is yours. Follow your. Tell us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm glad to participate in this interesting panel, and I want to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's a pity that I cannot be with you. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in Brussels today. I will share screen and start my slides. Just let me know if you can see it. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. And you can see them moving, I hope.
Yeah, we see the mouse. Yeah,
Great, thank you. So I'll just talk about, let's say, the nutritional part of this discussion. And first of all, what is personalized nutrition? There is no agreed definition of personalized nutrition. It is mostly defined as an approach that uses information on individual characteristics to develop targeted nutritional advice, products, or services. Gimney and al. Have described it as an approach that assists individuals in achieving what we want to have, finally, a lasting dietary behavior change that will be beneficial for health. So everything that led to this change is personalized nutrition. Of course, there's a lot of confusion in the literature because we also find terms like precision nutrition, but sometimes personalized nutrition is expressed as from nutrigenomics or nutrigenetics or nutritional genomics. So what personalization can be based on? Biological evidence of the different responses to food and nutrients depending on genotyping or phenotyping characteristics. And the analysis of current behavior, that means food intake or energy expenditure or preferences of barriers, objectives. And finally, we have to deliver interventions based on all this. And these interventions should motivate and enable the individual to make the appropriate changes in their eating pattern to have a better or healthier nutrition. And what we can see here, we can see that what we're trying to do is to go from the population advice to a group advice and personalized advice. And we need both. We need the group advice, for example, think of pregnant women as a group, or elderly, or people with specific disease, for example, with diabetes or obesity. So we do need the group advice, and then we also need the personalized advice. So we go from the population to the group to the personalization. And of course, as I told you, we need all this information regarding phenotype, genotype, and all the information regarding habits, nutritional habits of the individual. But what is more, I think, difficult for people to understand is what are we going to do with the genetics, the gene-nutrient interaction. So I just chose to give you only one example of what do we mean by gene-nutrient interaction and how we can use these results for personalized nutrition. And this is a paper published a few years ago that talks about gene polymorphisms. And they say that if you have this particular NOS3 gene polymorphism, these are associated with risk markers of cardiovascular disease, and they interact with the consumption of a specific nutrient that is omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. What that means in practice, that if you have this carrier of this particular NOS3 gene, then if you are this particular individual, you are going to have a greater beneficial effect if you receive from your diet or as a supplement omega-3 fatty acids in order to reduce your plasma triglycerides. So there is a direct gene-nutrient interaction. So we're trying to learn more on this area, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics, and this will help us to progress in this area that we are talking about personalized nutrition. Then in the next 5 minutes, I will try and go through our project. The protein is called Protein. It's Horizon project. The title is Personalized Nutrition for Healthy Living. You can see that there are very many partners, and we're collaborating towards this idea of personalized nutrition. And the overall objective of this project is to promote a healthy lifestyle in order to improve the general state of health of the European population, and of course to use the latest technology to offer advanced personalization tools for nutrition and physical activity plans. And the specific goals are to model existing knowledge, to develop an ICT system for personalized nutrition. This is the main goal. But we also want to demonstrate and validate the protein system. We're now doing all the clinical trials. We're at this stage, but we also want to communicate the protein vision and to promote the healthy lifestyle, to disseminate openly and freely when possible, and further exploit the project results. And last but not least, to conduct responsible research and adhere to ethics requirements. So, well, as I said before, we're also looking for the genetics and gut microbiota analysis. I'm not going to go through all these details about the genes we're looking for, but we are getting blood samples from the participants, and we're sort of analyzing and looking for blood-based biomarkers. We're also looking at gut microbiota, and all these results from all these genes we're looking for, we're hoping that will be able to help us in having a more personalized nutrition for our individuals. Here you can also see an example of what of the app and what it does. For example, it analyzes, for example, a recipe, or it gives you the nutritional analysis of a meal if you're going, for example, to dine. To eat outside in a restaurant. There is a dashboard that can be used by the health professionals, the dietitians. And this is a weekly plan that can, for example, is ready for a participant, taking into account, of course, all the information for a personalized plan. And this is the consortium. And I want to thank them all. And yes, I'm hoping I'm going to have some questions to say a few more things about the protein project. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. For par condicio, I should ask, it's strange to ask a question to a person who is in Greece, but no, we've been doing that for 2 years. Any question you want to ask specific? Yes, please. Maria, there are some questions. Can you say your name and...
Yes, Costina Prifti.
I will see to the chat. Yes, I will stop sharing. Yes, okay.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I'm Costina Prifti from Erasmus University. I was just wondering, with personalized nutrition, what sort of variables are considered from the individual. So how do you personalize it essentially?
It's a very great question, thank you. As a nutritionist, I will tell you that all these years, we're working on personalization. That means we're trying to get all the information that are possible for personalization. That means when we're sort of taking into account different parameters, anthropometric parameters, let's start from that, weight and hip circumference or body composition. And then, of course, from the beginning, we have to take into account the age, the sex, the characteristics of the individual. And then we take all the anthropometric measurements. And then we can take what we call to assess the nutritional status of the individual. That means dietary intake, lack of certain nutrients. And what is, I would say, the new technology helped us is to have, for example, sensors. In protein, I didn't have the time to tell you everything, but we're using sensors for assessing physical activity. We're using sensors for assessing glucose level for diabetic patients. So we're using all sorts of different sensors. And we're hoping that we're going to get some information from all this new technology, but we're also hoping to have information from genetics and from microbiota analysis. I don't know if I answered your question, but there are a lot of information we're trying to bring together, and the technology helps us to do that in order to end up with a more personalized nutrition.
So there is under the skin but Tanya was talking about above the skin and all the social determinants, conditions that can influence. But we come back to that, please, sir.
Hello, my name is Marco Flora from the University of Groningen. My question will be more focused on the legal part. So my question is the processing of data in this app based on consent of the users? And if yes, do you separate between the primary purpose, which is to provide personalized nutrition information, and the purpose for research? Can the users choose to opt in for the first one and not be included in the part concerning research? Thank you.
I should answer this because...
Exactly. I was going to say that we have the consent from all the participants.
Yeah. But
the rest is yours.
Yeah, maybe this is, we can hunch to the data protection part. So if you don't mind, hold your horses, we come back to your question. And I ask Wolfgang to take the floor. So he's going to navigate us a little bit into the world of GDPR, but also consumer protection, and give us something about this European health data space, how can be used, please. You want to come here? Yeah. As you please, it's okay, stay there.
Hello, I hope this is working, yeah. So thank you also for the invitation. It's my first time here, I'm very excited to be here. And I'm also very excited to be able to talk on this topic. I'm working in the privacy field for some years now, and this topic is particularly interesting in my opinion because we are seeing a lot of personalization offers going on in very different fields of business. In many of those fields, we not often see the interesting use case for the consumers. I'm referring here especially to services that basically personalize their services for also increasing advertisement. Here we are talking about health, talking about personalization of the service to increase health. And this is one of the claims that most of these tools and services are making, and that's why it's very interesting because here we see a clear benefit also for consumers, but this is also pretty much to bring an alliance with the clear risks that we are also facing and seeing here in these apps. So my part will be also a bit about stressing the importance of GDPR compliance, which I hope doesn't bring you to sleep straight away. Compliance is never really popular, but in this case, I guess it's very much important. First of all, because of the nature of the data, as we already heard, we are normally dealing here with health data, which are considered to be sensitive categories of data in accordance to the GDPR, which already brings us into Article 9 of the GDPR and requires an explicit consent to process them. Second important factor about these nutrition apps is that they're collecting a vast amount of data. So we're having lots of data processed, and we're having sensitive category of data processed. So for anyone who has been working in a GDPR is quite long. There are so many provisions in there that most of the people gladly never need. But in these cases, I think it's always important to look very deep into the GDPR and to think and remind ourselves that for those processings, you will need a data protection impact assessment. You will have to go the whole way when it comes to data security, and you will also have to maybe consider about Article 22, which is about automated decisions and profiling, because these health apps can also affect you in a almost like this is the requirement in a legally way or in something similar as a legal way, I would argue, at least because this is affecting the health of consumers as well. So we talked a bit about the benefits. I also want to talk a bit about the risks. We have seen research happening already in this field. So when it comes to optimization and personalization, and I'm referring to my prior speakers here, we saw the benefits that this should help them increase their objectives, and we also see the risks that are coming with those tools. And I want to point to one research that has been done by Mirjan Sachs, where he was investigating specifically on nutrition apps and onto the business model. So nutrition apps, this is also a sector that is becoming very popular for entrepreneurs. Even the European Union sees great potential for economic purposes. But we should not forget that most of these apps are for profit apps, and the businesses have an intention to also make money on that. So this is normally or very often happening in a way that they are trying to engage consumer interaction with the apps, which is of course a business model that can be used. But this is also often a bit putting the objective of the consumer to just increase your own health benefits a bit to the side. So testings and research has shown that some of the apps are, of course, putting their own interest a bit into the center of their perspective, and also pushing consumers to interact with their apps a bit, even though it's not necessarily important anymore to achieve any health benefits. So, and as we have seen in the last years already from research, this can also go into the contradiction way. This can also lead to, for perfectly healthy persons, lead to eating disorders, for example, especially with teenagers, and also lead to body dissatisfaction, although the persons, for example, have no health issues at the very beginning. Why is this relevant? We have, for example, in Germany, the development that doctors are by now already prescribing certain apps for patients, for example, for specifically helping them and addressing losing overweight. And the German health insurance is covering those prescriptions, like the use of those apps, with per person per year up to 2,000 euros, which is quite a high number, and is also leading to the fact that many of those apps, the prices for those apps are skyrocketing in the previous months and years. And we see a bit of a problem here because the benefit and the effectiveness of the use of those apps is not always scientifically proven. The second point why I'm raising this issue about risk is because I want to point to one of the studies that has been done from one of our member organizations in the Netherlands. Consumer Bond is our Dutch member. They investigated into some of those apps, first time in 2018 from a privacy perspective, second time in 2021. In the first time, they assessed 3 apps and came to the conclusion that from a privacy perspective, none of them were recommended to use. And in the follow-up test, they came to the conclusion, also with communicating with the app providers, that after some communication and some adoptions, 3 of them are good to use and the 2 others did not respond. So the privacy score was not very, very good for them. Last point that I want to mention is the current development. We are seeing at the moment the proposal from the European Commission on the European health data space. So we are not only dealing here with GDPR. GDPR is at the moment the state of the art, but we are soon going to have a new legislation that is addressing many of those issues and is also trying to push the business perspective in this field. So the European health data space is specifically also including wellness apps, which is not only health apps, but also meditation apps, running apps, everything that is going into this direction, and opening up those secondary use of data so that researchers, for example, but not only researchers, but also innovators who want to build their own startup, for example, can access those data and can make use of those information that have been collected by other app providers already. We are seeing here that many things are a bit unclear in the European health data space so far, and will need more detail, especially in the legislation process. But we are seeing some risks again happening, for example, for making those data available for building on algorithms, of course for health purposes. But I see a difficulty, for example, when a researcher, let's say like that, goes to one of the app providers, asks them for the data. This data should be provided generally in an anonymized form, and therefore you get the data and then you build your research or your algorithm on it, but you don't really have knowledge about the quality of the data. So how is this data being collected, and how is this data, is there a bias to this data, for example? And yeah, so we're seeing some issues here. Second point I want to mention, I've been to a panel listening yesterday as well, that was also similar and also addressing the European health data space a little bit. So the European health data space for secondary use is generally relying that those data would only be shared when they are anonymized. Anonymization is a very difficult process from a technical perspective, and it is also a very costly process. So, and we also see that, especially for research purposes, I heard this also yesterday, that it's not always very helpful to get this data in an anonymized form, because then you cannot really draw the conclusions out of it anymore as they want. So we're seeing some risks here as well when it comes to anonymization, and also data security is the next step. So how secure is the anonymization, and how effective was it? Which brings me to the last point, consumers and their control of data. The GDPR was supposed to give consumers more control of their data, and the European health data space is also addressing this and also wants to give more or less consumers again control of their data. But in my opinion, personal opinion so far, the European health data space is doing a bit of the contrary. Consumers will lose inevitably control of their data when everybody is pretty much able to access these data, even though they might be anonymized at the first stage, but maybe not going to be anonymized for very much or for very long. So yeah, I think we are facing here a bit of a loss of control of consumers when it comes to health data, and with this I'd like to close.
Any question about what Wolfgang said? If not, I have one. So my idea, I mean, if I have a problem with an app, nutritional app, will I be better off going to the data protection authority somehow, or to the consumer organization?
Of course, the data protection authority is the authority body. So if I have a problem, and I can always lodge a complaint with the authority. Also, consumer organizations provide information. It always depends on the organization, which country you are. So you can get legal advice there, and they will help you to write a complaint or to file a complaint. So I think both bodies are the right to go to.
There's a future for both. Yeah,
of course, there's a future.
Okay. Any question? Because that will give me the opportunity to introduce Olga. Come. It's yours.
Yeah, hello from me too. Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Olga Gotsopoulou, and I'm a researcher at the Law Science Technology and Society Research Group, but also at the Health and Law Aging Lab, Health and Aging Law Lab, actually, at the Free University of Brussels. I would also like to thank the speakers before me for having already presented many different topics with respect to personalized nutrition. From my side, I'm actually also in the field of data protection law, but today I'm going to speak about something a bit different in order to complete the picture of what we have discussed today, because I want to prove to you that personalized nutrition, like many other innovations, is a topic that actually has many aspects that we need to take into account apart from data protection law. And I call it the in-betweens beyond data protection law, and I think that by explaining the next slides, this will become clear to you why I say that. These are just the acknowledgements with respect to that I've been working in two projects. The one is the Protein Project, and the other one is the SOSUBI project. They're both Horizon 2020 projects, and they work intensively with research participants on different aspects, and not only personalized nutrition. So, with respect to this question, these in-betweens, there are many different, actually, topics that we could touch upon, but for today, because actually I have the shorter intervention from the other speakers, I decided only to focus on 3 points. The first one is the EU food law, the second one is the medical device regulation, and the third one is with respect to research, because personalized nutrition, like again, other innovation, requires a lot of research. So, the first in between, which has to do with the EU food law, and I just want to say that I will not go into many details about legislation. In this particular one, with respect to EU food law, I will refer to the general food law and the nutrition and health claims regulation. I will start with the fact that even though we do have definitions with respect to what constitutes a food product, in practice there still remains the question, does personalized nutrition lead to personalized food products? Because in that case, as we understand, then we would also have EU food law applying to this. Then the next question is that, as I said, that although we do have definitions as to what constitutes a food product, and we also have definitions as to what constitutes a medicinal product, when it comes again to personalized nutrition, given all this advice that is being provided to the user, we see that it's not always clear whether we are talking about a medicinal or a food product. And the third one, which personally I find the most fascinating, because it also relates to my PhD topic with respect to information transparency and accessibility, is the one with offering information to the users in the form of health claims. So in food law, apparently it's not allowed to attribute any kind of medicinal functions to food products. So what you can do instead is that you can attribute some nutrition claims. For example, this yogurt is fat-free, or health claims. For example, this orange juice has vitamin C, which can be beneficial for your health, for your immune system. So this regulation has actually been produced with in mind having the general population. But what comes when we speak about personalized nutrition? We heard before Maria saying that we do have, in personalized nutrition, we move from the general population to the group advice to the personal advice, to the individual advice. So how do you provide this kind of nutrition, these health statements, for instance, when it comes to target groups and subgroups, and then we also have individuals? So you would have to provide individualized information for every person basically who is using these devices. And all this information I want to say that you can find in a great paper by Professors Redger, Fitz, and De Boer, who have analyzed this topic in detail. My second point is about actually a medical device regulation specifically. And I just brought this example because there are actually many personalized nutrition apps. Okay, maybe not so many, but some personalized nutrition apps out there already. And quite popular are those lately with function with breathalyzers. So basically, they send you this device that you breathe in it, and then every day, I think in the morning or in the evening, and then they send you personalized recommendation as to what you have to eat that day in order to avoid some kind of gut issues and so forth. Of course, this is not a new in between, I would say. This is something we have already seen with respect to lifestyle apps and other exercise apps, menstruation apps, and so forth. It's the in-between of the lifestyle and health. And of course, I specifically refer to the medical device regulation article that tells us what the medical device is. And there we see that a primary element of what a medical device is actually depends on the intention of the manufacturer to use this device for medical purposes. Now, in practice, a lot of these personalized nutrition apps, they're not registered as medical devices. But when we look into their purposes, many of them claim, maybe they don't claim that they do diagnosis, but they do claim to do some of this here, like prevention, monitoring, prediction of different diseases. So you understand that if a personalized nutrition app would qualify as a medical device, then we would have also some extra requirements before this device actually ends up to market. And the last point has to do with research, because personalized nutrition apps and services, they need a lot of data in order to function. That's also exactly what Maria said before, answering one of the questions of the audience members, that the nutritionists and the people working on these apps, they really need a lot of data. And they don't need only the data of the user, for instance, on a daily basis, but they also need the data for research purposes in order to keep improving these apps and services. And I have included here two examples, the Zoe app, which is a very popular, I think it's one of the first personalized nutrition apps, but only personalized nutrition. They also offer other services. Recently, during Corona, they also did COVID-19 related research. And another article I read recently from the University of Copenhagen about researchers who are using, they're also food scientists, and they're using data from a very big pool of information from people that they actually have been following since their birth. Now they're adults, and they aspire to continue following them for the rest of their lives, if that's possible. And I just wanted to say that briefly, we do see some emerging concepts with respect to how people could actually provide their data for different purposes of research. Healthcare is actually has a privileged, I would say, position within this realm. And we recently saw the definition offered in the Data Governance Act, which in that particular case refers to data altruism. Data altruism would mean voluntary sharing of data based on consent or permission, depending who provides actually this data. But we also observe, I would say, another emerging trend, which is not so new, actually, because it is already started in the 90s. Perhaps some initiatives already, some people would say, some historians have started even before that, with respect to citizen science. And with a colleague of mine, Luc van der Veer, that we are working on this other project I was talking about, Social B. Actually, a few weeks ago, we spoke in another conference, specifically on the topic of data altruism, citizen science, and healthcare, and health in general. And we noticed that there are still some things that we believe that this emerging concept of data altruism, in combination with this promotion of citizen science and participatory designs and involvement of citizens in different kinds of research, will have some extra implications. And we came up with some questions. I only present some to you. which we think they're also relevant in the concept of in the field of personalized nutrition. So the first one is whether citizen science and data altruism will actually end up redefining traditional participation of research subjects in research. And we heard also before in the panel that indeed it's already complicated to an extent to involve research participants. So perhaps this will complicate the things a little bit more. The second question, what are actually the borders between data altruism and citizen science? And we do already have some suggestions as to what this could be, but I guess I don't have enough time for doing this now. We could do this during the Q&A. And lastly, what about commercialization of results based on data collected in the context of citizen science or data altruism? And with that, I think this was my last slide. I will conclude here. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, if you have any questions right now, actually we will open the Q&A immediately, if I'm not mistaken, Eugenio, right?
Yeah. So if you want, if there's any question, maybe can you broach the question that our friend there posed about consent
to go back to the secondary user.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned something about on which legal basis do we process data in research projects. Can you, sorry.
So one of the requirements of consent to be valid, as per the GDPR, is for it to be specific. So I see a tension here. If you have a too specific purpose or too specific consent, then the reuse of data is limited and the actual use of data is limited. So this is actually my question. If you separate between the processing that is necessary for provision of the services and the one that's necessary for enhancing the app or further research, and if you see a tension between this notion of specific consent and the use cases that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I will say a few things, and I think then I will go and sit at the table and give this question back to Wolfgang, because I think it was meant for him from the beginning. But I just want to say that based on this research, actually we did First, I want to say something else, and then I will go to the consent. That we, with my colleague, we actually searched many different projects at EU level that are citizen science projects, they self-identify as citizen science projects, I must say. And we were trying to understand which of them actually do health-related research or healthcare-related research. And it was not always clear. Very often, we felt like what we saw is that actually the consortia were claiming that we might collect some data that somehow are related to health, but we're not using them for health-related reasons directly, so then they don't qualify as health data. So that already starts as a very, especially, for instance, I can bring a specific example in the case of environmental projects. There, it's really difficult to say whether these projects actually relate to health or they actually collect health data or not. With respect to the consent question, indeed, I mean, in GDPR, we do know that there is somehow a privileged position when it comes to scientific research. There's a number of recitals that they prove that, and also Article 9, when it comes to sensitive data, also has some ways for researchers to do their research. We also see that now with the Data Governance Act, with the concept of data altruism, that if you actually see, and I really invite you to do this, to see how the definition of data altruism in Article 2 developed from the proposal to how it actually ended up being adopted. It's really, really interesting. They do mention for general interest purposes twice, because they really want to emphasize that this is something to do with scientific research in the context of general interest. So I'm really looking forward to see how this informed consent idea will develop, especially now because now in the context of data altruism we will have a new consent form, a European consent form, which will be based, if I remember correctly, on consent forms that are currently used for the collecting of blood, the blood collection, and tissue cells. So indeed, it is quite complex in practice when you have to deal with this kind of research projects. And with that, I will take my seat back so we can have the...
Beautiful there. To If anybody has a question, I have a question. I mean, Tanya, does it chime well with the, this citizen science, data altruism, and digital food activism? I mean, do you see any connection? Are your participants willing, interested? Do they understand the data issue, or are they afraid, as Wolfgang pointed out quite clearly, that actually most of these apps are just for selling stuff?
I think it's important at the beginning to point out that it's not a commercial app that we're developing, so it's a research project, and the aim is to use the data in this context. So no ideas of commercialization are currently around, which I think is very important, because when we conducted our focus groups, for instance, there were a lot of reservations that have been voiced, but I don't want to use the app, we don't know what this is being used for. And we really had to stress quite a bit that this was actually within a research context.
Yeah.
And once that became clear, it was like, oh, then it could be interesting for me, because there were a lot of questions, who's behind this? And we were saying it's the Swiss National Science Foundation, it's the ETH, it's my university in St. Gallen, so there's no commercial provider behind it. So I think that was very important for everyone. Once that was clearer, and how it works, because we work with a form of altruism, because the data are requested by the individual consumer from the retailer that collects the data in their loyalty programs, and then that's donated to us, so we can then use it for research purposes. So in that sense, once all, who's involved was clear, although we've said that before, we've made this clear, but you have to explain it a bit more. And once it was clear that it was they who could initiate, so I'm requesting my data, I donate it, and then I can profit from this app, I think that helped a lot in understanding. And along the way, of course, a lot of terminology, also legal, had to be used of you have this right to request your data, you also have the right to delete it. I think in some sense what was going on there was an awareness raising while we were doing research, actually. So telling and informing. So it triggered, once that became clear, it triggered interesting conversations and actions, I would say, and non-participating or participating.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Got also another question, but this is more for Maria and Tanya. Which is a bit elephant. I always ask, is it possible to be healthy at any size? Because here there is a sort of tension, I see, between the individual, epitomized by the right to privacy, to be and look however I want to be and look without being advised. And on the other hand, the recognition that comes from science that being overweight can carry with it health risks. So it's possible to be healthy at any size. Should be also make room for the acceptance of sort of fat identity. What do you think, Tanya?
I would first pass it to the nutritionist, but I think it's
Maria,
important,
so
but I have something to say on that.
Maria
too.
first. And then.
Okay, yes. We've been talking, for the last 20 years, if they're healthy obese. And what do we mean by healthy obese? And now the people that they don't have any health problems, that means I'm overweight or obese, but I don't have diabetes. Is that what is the best for health, or is it I'm not healthy because I have diabetes? So I would say it's a difficult, let's call it like that, topic, because health is related to a number of factors. For example, we should also talk about mental health. So what does it mean I'm healthy? So generally speaking, what we are trying to do is to end up to consensus, if possible, of certain areas that we all agree. That means if we do, I will use what the ancient Greeks used to say, that you need to feel well with your mind and your body. So I would say that this is probably the best approach. That means I have to take into account how I feel, and also, of course, lack of disease. So taking this into account, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, it's. I don't think I was looking for an answer, but just to ask the question, please, Tanya.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but from the literature that I know about obesity, I'm also aware of discussions around that it's not necessarily the body shape that tells you something about how healthy a person is, but more about the fatty tissue specifically around specific organs, if I understand that correctly. So you can look very thin, but then there's a lot of fatty tissue around certain organs, which once you kind of have the medical devices and procedures to find that out, you can see that actually this poses a health risk for the person, but it's not visible to us. If you look at someone and she's tall and presumably thin, and vice versa. So I think, as I said, I'm not an expert on that, but I think it's an interesting finding that is maybe less talked about, that could, at least for our public understanding of body shapes, help us to be a bit more open-minded.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and also we could also say something about stigmatization, which is very important, because we should not stigmatize people according to their size. And we do have a lot of research going on the last few years about that.
Yeah. Indeed. Look, and if there is anybody who wants to, Gloria.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to understand this nutritionism concept that I'm not familiar with, and trying to make sense of what is this nutritionism. It sounds bad, and then personalized nutrition, it sounds good. So who is right and who is wrong? And so my question will be the app that you are working on. Is that not about nutrition there, or is it about nutrition? And is it compatible that you have an app about nutrition, but it's not nutritionism? When does nutritionism or bad nutritionism start? That's where I'm a bit confused.
Yes, thanks for the question, Gloria. So, nutritionism we need for the app. That's very, nutrition science we need for the app. That's very clear. But in some ways, nutritional knowledge has been taken to forms of extremes by some groups, saying that this is the only truth. I'm pretty sure most nutritionists wouldn't do that. But the idea of nutrients, of proteins, has been taken up in various ways that overemphasize it perhaps slightly. And this is what Screenis argues in his concept. So, and I think this is an interesting point to have as a warning lamp back in our minds in our research project to, yes, use nutrition science, but to not go into any extreme. So to prevent something like eating disorders, because, if you sort of get too extreme about what and how it gets tricky. But how can you do that? And here I see a real issue with the development of an app and technology that in some stances needs to take a very clear stance on what is good and what is bad. So, you have to categorize in an app whether a product is good and how much of that product is good for you. And that's a real challenge because the person is different. So I guess in Maria's app, we have more of a personalized nutrition approach where we have much more data. So this may be less of an issue. But in our app, we only have purchasing data of a person. So based on that, to make very strong categories is tricky. So for me, it's more of a warning sign to say, well, we should maybe open up here and include other kinds of data. It's also what I hear from participants in the research saying, well, what I buy at these two big supermarkets in Switzerland doesn't really cover all of my consumption habits. I go to the market, sometimes I go to this other retailer, which is not included. It really doesn't cover everything. So sort of bringing in that complicatedness and that messiness of everyday eating, which I ideally would love to do as a sociologist, an STS scholar, is very hard in an app. So I think for me or for part of the project, this is more of a warning sign not to go to extreme with the nutritionism.
Maria, do you want to have a take on this? Nutritionism versus personalized nutrition.
Yeah, this is I like the discussion. I like it a lot. But okay, as a nutritionist, as a health professional, let's start like that. Yes, we do need a lot of data. Yes, we do need personalized nutrition. That means what I said before, we need as much as possible. And we really think that technology can help us in putting this all together. That's the way I understand, as an older generation scientist, that technology can help me to put this all together and end up with a more, how can I say, correct result. That's the word I was looking for. On the other hand, I do agree that there is a danger of having people that they don't really understand all this, or what is happening. They are really not able to use all this information. And there are cases that this information is not used in the right way. And I do understand this idea of nutritionism, but I'm not sure how far we can get to finding out all the parameters that are related to that. For the time being, I think it's a concern. That's the way I understand it. But we don't have enough data yet to understand which areas we have to concentrate and what sort of information we should really use, for example, for the, how can I say, for the consumer.
Thank you, Maria. Very good. Any other question? Sorry. So maybe, I mean, I have a, yeah, do you mind if I take advantage of Wolfgang is here? I don't know, don't you see that particularly in this case, personalized nutrition apps, there is a really convergence, and maybe I insist or I'm boring about that, between data protection law and consumer law. So there is no, I mean, after all, consumer, they want fairness, also in data protection there is fairness, different understanding. On the one hand, we have data subjects, here we have consumers, and again, on the one hand, we have a supervisionary authority. You go there and you hope they bring the claim against the company not fulfilling certain conditions related to GDPR. But in the consumer, I go to the consumer organization and I can go directly against the app provider. So don't you see these two words that have been quite parallel for a long time, consumer law and data protection, coming closer and closer together?
Of course, like we're seeing in the last years through digitalization that many of those normal consumer products are becoming digitalized, and these two fields basically merge more and more. We don't see, per definition, a problem in that. And I also want to underline nutrition apps per se, only because they're using data and only because they're using sensitive categories of data. We're of course not against this. We're seeing the benefits here as well. It's just important to inform consumers correctly what they can expect from this. Don't make wrong claims, as you were mentioning, when it comes to health claims, and provide a service that is realistically, say, like this, and not exploiting a very sensitive topic, I guess, for many consumers out there, for advertising purposes, for in-app per case purposes, and not only for keeping users interacting with a platform that they are interacting for just because for business purposes. So I think the interest of the consumer has to be taken here very seriously and put into the focus also of the development and how an app is working. And this was what I was trying to stress with these examples of where, of course, for profit apps, using digital choice architectures to keep consumers interacting with the app, aside of maybe the health benefits that they are still able to actually get out of it. So, of course, consumer law, digital law, GDPR, privacy, we see this coming together all of the time by now, and it's important to see it from a broad perspective.
Yeah, because I mean, if I think I read it somewhere in the Digital Service Directive, if you say, okay, I'm going to have some privacy by design, and then so in the project, and then I will have also the settings of my app according to the privacy by default principle, and then it turns out that it's not like that. That is a lack of conformity. So that's consumer law. but at the same time is also an infringement on GDPR. But I think it gets quicker if you use the consumer law avenues. No?
So when we just very shortly, because enforcement is an interdisciplinary enforcement is a topic that is concerning BEOC very much, and it's very difficult to put that together at the moment. We're having different authorities dealing with different issues, and our panel that BEOC is organizing right now in the room next door is also dealing with this topic of interdisciplinary enforcement. At the moment, we don't see a solution yet. We're having the CPC alerts that there's a new regulation, or not so new anymore. It's fairly new, that is dealing with many different topics of enforcement or in the consumer, in the field of consumer rights, but it's not including GDPR. And we're seeing in which way this will be going, if it's also going to be possible to include GDPR here. At the moment, it's not the case. And this is pretty much the state of where we are standing at the moment.
Okay, so we're heading towards the conclusion. We're getting hungry, and I wanted to give the floor to Olga, because she actually organized all of these. She took care of the panelists, she took care of the content. So thank you very much, Olga. If you want to add something else, because you said that you selected some areas of law that could be interested, but you left some others outside.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eugenia. I will not take more than 1 minute because I think all of you want to go slowly to start queuing for the lunch. I just will say that indeed, in this paper I mentioned before in my slides, the authors have created an amazing table where they cite all the different fields of EU law that can be applicable in the context of personalized nutrition, which shows all the different implications. And I only selected 3, but I think they do mention, I don't know, at least 10 different fields that they could be somehow relevant. Including consumer protection and consumer rights, even patient rights and so forth. I just would like to say thank you very much to all the speakers that have been really amazing and cooperated the whole time really well. And also thank the audience that has been with us during the whole duration. And finally, our moderator, Eugenio, for doing a brilliant job moderating this panel. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of CBTP.